All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Greg Ayotte. I'm the Director of Consumer Services for the Brain Injury Association of America, and welcome to this special Butch Altman Memorial Fund webinar. Just a few notes about the webinar and today's presentation. So first, the Butch Altman Memorial Fund was developed by Maureen Alterman. Butch was her husband. Maureen Alterman was a longtime supporter of the Brain Injury Association of America. She served on the Brain Injury Association of America Board of Directors. She served with the Brain Injury Association of Michigan, where she lives. She's been a longtime advocate for people with brain injury. She started this fund in memory of her husband, who also was an educator, with the intent of trying to support education and awareness around brain injury. We're grateful for that support that allows us to put on webinars like these. So a few housekeeping notes. There is a PDF of the presentation and the takeaways available. There should be a handout section on your screen. You can download those handouts. If you don't receive them, we'll be sending them out to everybody that registered for the webinar after as well. Everybody is muted. All attendees are muted. You can use the question box or the chat box to type in questions at any point during today's presentation. We're going to hold the questions until the end of the presentation. If we don't get to your question, we'll be able to track who asked what, and we'll try to follow up with folks following the webinar. Now, on to today's presentation. I've had the privilege to work with this Brain Injury Advisory Council group in developing this presentation. So they are all members of the Brain Injury Association of America's Brain Injury Advisory Council. The council works to improve awareness and understanding about brain injury, both at the national and local level. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their own experiences. I'll turn it over to Carol.
All right, actually, next slide, please.
Here we go.
And we can go in order of our slide here. So Paul, why don't you go first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Paul Bosworth. I'm from South Louisiana. I had my brain injury on 9/11/2007 and fought my way to get a diagnosis, and luckily found this group where I can now give back, which I'll go into in a little bit. But grateful to be here, grateful to be amongst this group.
Hi, I'm Darcy Keith. I'm from Fishers, Indiana. My brain injury occurred September 12, 1991 from a car crash. I am so thankful that you joined us today for the webinar, and I trust that you will get some great information that will help you live a better life.
Hi, I'm Kelly Lang. I'm from Virginia, and I was injured in a car accident in 2001. I'm also a caregiver to my daughter who also had a traumatic brain injury during the accident, and I've been advocating for brain injury ever since. So thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm Kelly Pokrevka. I am from Virginia, and I was injured when I was 19 and have been doing this advocacy since. I'm very excited.
And I'm Carol Starr, and I have been living with brain injury since a car accident in 1999 when I was 32. And it is such a privilege to be part of this group, to be able to use what I've been through to make a difference. And I've been part of this council since 2016.
Good morning, y'all. Welcome. I'm Angela Lee Tucker, and my brain injury occurred in the summer of 2008. It was a car crash in New York City. My husband was killed in that crash. I now reside in Nashville, North Carolina, and I'm so glad you each chose to be here with us today. And I was in the council in 2017, 18?
19.
2019, I joined this amazing group of people.
We all help each other out. Next slide.
So just to explain a little bit about who we are and what we do, the Brain Injury Advisory Council is a diverse community of brain injury survivors, as you have seen. and who we've all moved beyond the initial stages of recovery. We support one another as survivors and as volunteer advocates. We represent the survivor perspective. We advise Brain Injury Association of America and other brain injury stakeholder groups. We advocate collectively, such as this, and individually at the local, state, and national levels. And we serve as a resource for survivors, caregivers, medical professionals, and community members. And we hope that you all will take away, even if it's just a little piece of information to help you on this very long journey, and it does get better.
So today we are going to talk about the early years after brain injury. To get us started, I'm going to ask my fellow council members to say just one word that to you describes what those early years were like. For me, one word would be confusing. Go ahead, Paul.
Overwhelming.
Overwhelming. Angela.
Devastating.
Devastating. Darcy.
Lonely.
Lonely. Kelly P.
Isolating.
Isolating. Kelly L.
Traumatic.
Traumatic. You can tell by the kind of words that we all use to describe the early years after brain injury how challenging it is, how difficult it is, how difficult it is to get through. But all of us have been through it. One time we added up all of our years of living with brain injury, and we realized that together we have 130 years of living with brain injury. That is a lot of experience. So we decided, when we came together to do this, we said, well, what can we offer? So we had an entire process to figure out, well, there's any number of topics that we could have come up with for the early years after brain injury. So we brainstormed a very, very long list of possibilities. And then through a series of surveys and looking at our own experiences, all right, well, what do we think is important? This is not the end all be all of topics. There is lots of other topics that are also important, but based on our own experiences, these were the things that we wanted to talk about with you today. So we're going to be talking about recognizing and working through denial, finding and receiving appropriate care, coping with loss of identity, dealing with brain fatigue, coping with difficulty expressing yourself, identifying and managing brain overload, and dealing with family and friends who just don't understand brain injury. So our first topic that we're going to discuss today is recognizing and working through denial. And Kelly Lang and I are going to be talking about that one. Each topic will be two or three of us talking about it.
So Carol, following brain injury, denial is very common. Letting go of denial and moving forward towards acceptance is a necessary, difficult, and personal process for all of us. Mm-hmm. For me, I remember thinking, this can't be happening. What do you mean I have a brain injury? How could that be? And then trying to, I was of the mindset of just keep pushing, keep working harder, keep trying to do more, which of course is the worst thing. Excuse me. And just trying to push forward and say, well, if I just do a little bit more, it'll go away. Almost like, the flu. Like if I take my medicine, it'll just go away. And it took me, this was probably the last step in my recovery that happened, where I finally learned how to accept it and trying to come up with ways to work through it, and then also to move forward, because I wasn't going to stay where I was. I wasn't going to go backwards, which I probably had already done. So I had to learn how to move forward. How was it for you?
Denial, like you, denial was a really long process for me. I was probably in denial for a good 5 years after my injury. And I think it's important to recognize that denial is a normal thing at first. That whenever anything like big and overwhelming happens to us, it's a natural thing at first to think, whoa, this is not real, this is not happening. The problem comes is when we stay there, because when we stay in that, this isn't real, then it prevents us from moving forward. That, for me, like, every day it was, I just this pounding in my head of no, this can't be real. I was always somebody who defined myself by my brain, by being smart. And suddenly I was, struggling with everyday things. Every night before I would go to sleep, my last thoughts would be, maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow is the day that I'm just going to wake up and all these symptoms are just magically going to disappear. And I really believed that. And I refused to use strategies, because I thought that if I use strategies to get things done, if I do things any differently than the old Carol did them, then that was weakness. Then that was letting the injury win. And I was very wrong about all of that. But it took me a long time to be able to recognize that. And and I think everybody goes through a process of denial. And some people work through it a little faster, some people work through it a little bit slower. Every counselor, psychologist that I saw told me that kind of like type A people like me have a particularly difficult time with it. Poster child here. But we put this topic first because it is crucial to working through to get to the other side. It's not that you don't still have symptoms, but you can't find a new life until you let go of the old one.
It's so true, because the life I had before is very different from the life I have now, but that doesn't mean it's any worse. In some ways it's better. It's brought me to meet all of you, which I probably would have never met any of you had I not had my injury.
Mm-hmm.
But it brought me to a different place in my life that I probably would have imagined prior. Yes, I still have symptoms. Yes, I still have to deal with them. But even talking to other survivors and learning from their experiences and seeing how their journey has been, and each one of us, just as no two brain injuries are alike, no two journeys are alike. We all have to try and figure out what's going to work for us. And for me personally, having a child with a brain injury also, I kind of put mine in the backside, but then I realized I have to show her, I have to model for her that it's okay. It's okay to admit. In fact, she didn't even know about mine. She was a little surprised to learn. And then it made a connection to teach her, to role model that, yes, I have a brain injury, but that doesn't mean I'm any less of a person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just different, and that's okay too.
Yeah, it's so hard to wrap one's brain around that. Different is just different, because I felt less than for so many years. And for me, getting over the denial, it all started in a bookstore. And I wasn't really looking to start my denial overcoming process that day. I'd gone in and I was looking for a gift for a friend, and I overloaded, which we're going to be talking about overload in a little while. And I sought refuge in the back of the store because it was just too much. And I completely forgot about buying a gift for a friend, but somehow I ended up in the health section of this bookstore. It was Borders, Books, and Music, which gives you an idea of how long ago this was. And there was a shelf of books on brain injury. I stared at that shelf for a really long time. Then I bought one. And it was like the first time I had read anything about brain injury. I could only read just a little bit because I struggle with reading. I still do. But I saw myself, my symptoms on the pages of that book, and it was scary. But yet it was kind of comforting at the same time to realize, because I kept thinking, this is not real. This can't be real. But, the words on the pages of that book, said, yeah, it is real. And I had to go through, we've talked about that, needing to go through it at your own pace, because nobody can force us to, you have to get over your denial right now. It doesn't work that way. It's a slow process. And for me, that book, was a start. You mentioned, meeting other survivors. That was another big piece, was being able to talk to other people and to know that we're not alone, because, Somebody said, he said isolating is one of the ways to describe brain injury. In the early years, it is so isolating. And we can talk to others and learn from their experience. That makes it less isolating.
Yeah, and building a community, even if it's just your own little community. I think our council is a little community.
Absolutely, yes.
Different types of communities, and just having that support, and where you can share your feelings and you can share strategies and add things to your toolbox to build a new you. I don't really subscribe to the old you, new you, but you are kind of building a new, different type of life for yourself.
Yes, and for me, like the early years were all about kind of adjusting to how I'm different. And now I'm 23 years post, it's all about kind of, I've adjusted to how I'm different, but there are many ways that I'm still the same. That I was a teacher before. I can't teach in the same way. I'm still a teacher right down to my core. Just how I teach is just different. And so it's integrating like how you're still the same and how you're different. But you can't get to those places until we move through that denial, phase. Like all of the good things that have happened to me, since my brain injury happened after I got through the denial phase. And it's hard. There's no question about it.
It's definitely a lot of work.
Yes, yeah, it is. It is a lot of work.
So why don't we go over the takeaways that we have. So recognize that letting go of your old life and self is not giving up. It's not. It's moving forward. It's actually part of the recovery process.
Connect with and learn from other brain injury survivors. And there are so many ways now to connect, not only in person, but also virtual through webinars like this, through groups on Facebook. Other survivors are a tremendous resource. Oops, we lost one.
To acknowledge the new you and skills, because you are going to be building new skills, and consider how those skills will enhance your life.
So Greg, if you can go back to the appropriate care opening slide. Ooh, we've had a major PowerPoint jump.
We're going to just thumb through a couple of them.
So for this section, along with, every section, we also had a ton of help from our other member, Anne, and she cannot be here today, but thank you, Anne. You were integral to every step of this.
Thank you, Anne. Yes.
All right. I'll take it away.
So
My apologies.
Thanks, Greg. September 11, 2007, choked on some food. The world went to black. I hit my head. It was a concussion. Everybody has concussions. I called my girlfriend. Let's go get this checked out. And they treated and released me within 4 or 5 hours. But my girlfriend left with huge eyes. And I didn't realize, she didn't realize that I'd joined an enormous amount of people who have this same challenge, which is it's not a paved pathway to get the appropriate care. You can get all kinds of care. I was getting things checked out in my body. I had nervous problems. I had eyesight issues. I had heart problems. I had every organ in my body misfired. But in the meantime, you mentioned denial in the last piece. I was Captain Denial. There was nothing wrong with me. Just ask me. And that took about 2 years until I learned about neuroplasticity, which we may go into in a minute. But I realized that I could route my direction. I could focus my thoughts to reroute, but we'll get to that later. It's often challenging to find a professional who understands brain injury. This is not something that's just segmented to one person. It's to many. Do you have something to say about this, Kelly?
Yeah, when I was, first starting, and honestly, even still today, I was simultaneously so overwhelmed by the sheer amount of numbers and therapy options. And at the same time, I still felt like I had no options. There were so many people saying like, oh, I did this and this cured me entirely. Or, different clinics saying, oh, we've seen so many people like you. We'll get you back in action in a week. And, at the same time, I got, little steps from each therapy. But at the end of the day, there was no miracle cure. What people said worked for them, didn't work for me. Sometimes it would work for me a little bit, but it was very difficult. I felt like I was very much drowning in all of the options while feeling like I had no hope or no options.
As a friend of mine says, if I can just get a fingertip hold and pull, I can feed my brain and I can get better. But that takes time. So please go about this with patience. The denial that I mentioned earlier was me laughing at myself, laughing at the fact that I couldn't talk anymore. I could talk yesterday, but now I can't talk today. I became hysterical. I became depressed. I became anxious because of this thing called a button. I had problems putting buttons on. My friends would judge me by sight and say, just take a nap. Just get over it. It's just a concussion. Not so fast. And it helped me, believe it or not, take care of myself, which I'd never done before. And what I ended up doing was pushing people out because I couldn't explain what I had. And today I can explain a little bit better, and maybe tomorrow I can explain a little bit more. But I was getting in my own way with the denial part, and the doctors were just answering the questions that I had. And I had, medicine for this and a medicine for that, and I couldn't talk right, and there was stuttering, and I did this oxygen therapy that changed a lot of it and made it better. But there was still the underlying reality of this doesn't go away overnight. And I guess that's part of the message here is part of it is self-care. Supplements are very different than they were 30 years ago. By doing this seminar, we're changing the face of the stigma that goes along with brain injury. No, it is something, and it is something that under proper care, we can do something about, but I found it to be mostly on me and two other friends, because I'd find something, I'd discover it, and then pass it in front of two other friends and say, does this sound right? And this is something that we're working to get more awareness about. And because, honestly, if I'd found one of these different alternative new supplement treatments, I might have gone back to work by now, which is a very bold statement for me to make 15 years post, but it's challenging. We get it, but watch what you're eating, watch what you're drinking. Meditation is something that's really helpful. And neuroplasticity is a thing. Do you want to comment on that, Kelly P?
Yeah, before we get into the neuroplasticity, I want to go over what works for one person, again, likely won't work for you. If you've seen one brain injury, you've seen one brain injury. And then also, one of the biggest and most important lessons I learned that was very difficult because it's not really what we grew up believing, was that you're allowed to question your doctor. You should question your doctor. And if they are not doing a good enough job getting you there, you can move on to another doctor. And that's obviously a lot easier said than done. But if a therapy isn't working for you, you don't have to feel bad saying, all right, I need to cut my losses. I need to find another therapy. I need to find another doctor. I need to find another clinician. And yeah, ask them, hey, are we doing enough for this? Should we be considering another therapy? You have agency. You should be a team with all of your clinicians and all of your people with you. I always took my mom to all my appointments with me because, sometimes I would get so overwhelmed, I would shut down. I couldn't remember a single thing. I would record the appointments on my phone. I would take notes, but know that you have agency. If something isn't working for you, you don't have to keep paying. You don't have to keep, extending your recovery longer and longer because you had so much hope in one therapy.
You reminded me, I learned how to get past my stutter by watching a movie called The King's Speech. And the king had a bad stutter, and they taught him to put a vowel in front of the consonant so you wouldn't slam into it. So I'd say, a tribute to today's society, and like, oh, nobody noticed it. We're all good. Because with me, it was all about show. What are people going to judge? How are people going to judge me? How are they going to look at me? I look fine, but internally I have World War III going on. And quite honestly, I'm not handling it right. When I open my mouth to say, help me, we don't always get the best answer. So what Kelly's saying, I'm just backing it up by be curious, be that question person. What's in place now probably solves about 20% of the bigger picture. And we're talking about that, the bigger picture, to get that care for you as individuals.
But yeah, reach out to support groups, to other survivors, ask what worked for them, take it with a grain of salt, ask which practitioners they loved, which ones they hated, which ones to avoid. Again, everyone's different, but it's very helpful to hear. Ask as many questions, do as much research. If you're not able to do research, if you can find even one good person to help you through this process, it'll really help.
I don't give a lot of advice, but herein lies my advice. You ready? Be patient. I thought mine was going to be gone in 2 weeks. Mine's still around and it's been 15 years. And along the way, I've made some really good days. That's a great thing. I'm all about good days, or good mornings, or good afternoons. Enhance those by appreciating them and keep going.
Definitely.
Boy, I can't stress that enough. Keep going.
Yeah, do not give up. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to rewire, make new connections, find new skills that you thought you had lost a long time ago. Never give up. It's so hard. It's so easy to give up. You feel like you're fighting a losing battle. It's so difficult. I'm still living with so many symptoms so far out, but you can do it.
You really can. Can we go to the takeaways, please, if that's okay with you, Kelly?
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Recognize that each person's pathway and treatments are unique.
Research and find out as much as you can about brain injury symptoms, and pick 3 people that you find validate what you're reading and what you're talking about, and stick with them.
Be curious and ask questions at your medical therapy appointments.
Neuroplasticity, sometimes it's a bad word, but in this case, it's a really, really good one. It's the ability to rewire your brain and improve your life, even if it's incrementally, even if it's baby steps. It's real. Never give up. Keep going. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the next topic on coping with loss of identity.
Hey y'all. Loss of identity after brain injury is common, yet unique to each person. We'd like to help you find your way through the fog and navigate your own unique healing journey. In this section, we'll talk about what loss of identity is and how the 3 of us have managed it. Carol, what is loss of identity for you?
You know, basically, it was after the brain injury, every single part of the way that I defined myself changed. You know, I had been a teacher. I couldn't teach anymore. I was a classical musician. I was a violinist and a singer. I couldn't do those things anymore because I have a rip-roaring case of hyperacusis, the sound sensitivity. You know, I was a daughter, I was a sister, I was a friend. I had trouble with gatherings with people. I couldn't function in the way that I used to. Like I said in one of the earlier sections, I defined myself by my brain, but by my quickness of my intellect. I felt slow. I felt like I couldn't understand things. So every part of the way that I defined who I was suddenly changed. So I didn't know who I was anymore. I looked just the same, but yet I would look in the mirror and feel like, who am I?
Definitely. My injury happened when I was in the middle of college at the University of Virginia. And, you know, college, all of your best friends live, you know, a mile away from you. You're constantly doing activities. There's so much going on. It was so great. And I couldn't accept that that was no longer really an option for me. I couldn't understand that I needed to draw lines, and things I used to be able to do, they weren't safe for me anymore. So I put myself into so many dangerous situations, trying to fight back, trying to prove that I could still hang with, the old Kelly. And I just couldn't. It was very difficult.
At the time of my injury, I was a VP of a PR firm in New York City. It was the top of my professional game. I had just gotten married. At the time of the crash, my husband was killed in that accident. I was in a 6-week coma and woke up to the new reality of being a widow. Loss of identity was tremendous for me. How have you ladies mourned the loss of yourselves, and how?
Yeah, that took a long time for me to realize that was an option. I thought mourning the loss of, my old self, or even realizing that I could become a new great person, I thought that was giving up. I couldn't just say like, yeah, I am disabled now, and that's totally fine. That's not giving up. That's, accepting, and that's allowing me to move on. And so now every year, on my brainiversary, I go out into nature. I'm always with myself, and I write down, things that I still haven't been able to do, goals for the future, things that are still important to me because they've obviously changed, skills I've learned in the last year, and reasons why I love who I am now. And those reasons are so different from what I used to love about myself, but they're very important.
Carol?
For me, that the morning, it was so powerful. And I don't think I realized at first that I was in a grief process, because, you associate grief with, somebody who died. But, I didn't die in that accident. But yet, yes, a part of me did die. The person that I was on July 5th, 1999, which is the day before my accident, that person did die. A new person was born on July 6th, 1999, the day of my accident. And, the way I describe it to people who haven't been through this is I ask them to think about like when they've lost a loved one. And I compare it to like my mom died. It's been 12 years now. And I say, as awful as that grief was, the grief over losing my own identity after brain injury, it was worse because, I was the one who died. And there were times when I thought that grief was going to break me. I thought, I can't do this. I can't come through this, that can't adjust to being a person with a disability, being a person who has limitations now, being different than I am. But yet, I did. I think what Kelly said about the brainiversary is so profound, because that is a really important day, that it marks that day that we lost our identities. For me, July 6th, it was a day of mourning, and now I hesitate to call it a day of celebration, but it kind of is. I'm not celebrating the fact that I got a brain injury on that day. What I do celebrate is how far I've come. I look back at how far I've come. I mean, early on, I nap 4 times a day, and I'm not exaggerating by that. And what I can do now that I couldn't do then, and because I became a new person on that day, I always do something new on July 6th, something I've never done before. It doesn't need to be big. It could be I go to a restaurant and I have a dish I've never eaten before. It's what it symbolizes, to me, that's more important. Having those rituals, I think, is important to building that new sense of identity.
Like Carol, Angela 1 died the summer of 2008. And that same night, Angela 2 was born. Angela 1 and 2 are very different people. Angela 1 was at the top of her career and her game and would take people out to drink wine because that was her job. Now I'm a cheap drunk. Angela 2 takes a lot of naps, would get lost on the subway in New York City. But understanding these two versions of myself have allowed me to wholly love and inhabit Angela. I treat it like a funeral, the death of myself. And I tried so hard to get back into the shoes of Angela 1, but they didn't fit. How have you ladies been able to build a new identity?
I just started picking up new skills, things that were very safe. And one, I told people I was doing them. I made sure that, I was in safe situations after, many mishaps where I needed to realize that was important. I had a canvas in my room, and I'm a terrible artist. I always have been. And I would get so focused on how ugly the painting I was making that I couldn't enjoy it. So then I just started painting over it every single night. So that way I could actually relax and actually, do the process. But yeah, try new things, focus on what you can do, not what you can't, and it'll happen.
And for me, like the more that I tried to go back to, for me, like my hobby was music. The more I tried to do the things that I couldn't do, the worse I felt about myself. But then I didn't know, well, what do I do? If I can't do what I used to do, then I felt stuck, for a long time. But then there was this little voice inside me that was saying, make something, which was really weird for me because old Carol was not something who wanted to do things with her hands. This was all new Carol. And so I have show and tell today. This was the first thing that I made, this paint by number. And I loved this thing. At the time when I did it, I could only work on it for about 15 minutes at a time. Then I'd be so tired, I'd need to take a nap afterwards. But I felt this was the first thing I had success at because I failed every single time I tried to do the things that the old Carol could do. This was something that the new Carol could do. And over time, I graduated to other crafts like making jewelry. This is one of the pieces of jewelry that I made. And then I graduated to teaching other brain injury survivors, particularly how to make jewelry. Then people asked me to speak about my crafts, and I realized I love being able to speak about this. And I knew that this is what I want to do. I want to speak about brain injury. I want to help other brain injury survivors. So,
and I'm so glad for that help because you've been my mentor in this counsel. The profound teacher you are is still very much there. The injury is full of limitations, but consider the gifts that this injury has given you. Now you get my full and undivided attention if you're talking to me. No distractions, because I can't manage distractions. Try new hobbies and explore new interests. So as we've shared, loss of identity impacts each of us differently. We use these strategies to find and love our new selves. And we hope that what we've shared today can support you on your own path to rediscovery. Now let's learn about how to deal with brain fatigue.
Our takeaways.
Oh yes, those are important. It helps to mourn the loss of the previous you while getting to know the new you.
Consider professional help and support groups.
Experiment with new hobbies and interests. Focus on what you can do instead of what you can't do.
Avoid comparing yourself with the old you.
Yeah, and like Kelly Lang said at the beginning of this, if the old new you does not work for you, don't worry about it. That's just you. That's totally fine. You don't have to have an old and new.
That's right.
Okay, we're going to move to the next topic, dealing with brain fatigue.
All right, so brain fatigue, the feeling of overwhelming mental exhaustion, is a common, debilitating, and misunderstood symptom of brain injury. It is so incredibly difficult to explain this phenomenon because you really can't. I would be walking and suddenly I would be completely, lights out basically. It was very difficult. It felt incredibly disabling. I felt very lonely. I felt like a failure, and it's been very difficult to try to find strategies, that would actually work to help me compensate for that. Kelly, do you have any thoughts?
Oh, yeah, I totally understand that. You feel like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with me that I have to rest? What is wrong with me that I just can't function? And of course I used caffeine a lot to keep myself going, had 2 small children, and there is no stopping. So learning those strategies of how to give yourself that time to recover. And as with everything, it gets better. It's probably never going to be perfect or the way it was, but that's okay. We figure out what strategies work for us, what we have in our toolbox. We try different things. You know, for me personally, it was going to a sleep neurologist. Never even knew that was a thing with brain injury. And heard another survivor talk about it and thought, you know what, I'm going to check it out. And sure enough, even though they said, you know, 9 out of 10 times we're not going to find anything, it's got to show up in that test. Well, sure enough, I ended up being diagnosed with both sleep apnea and narcolepsy, which was just a shocker because I had no symptoms prior to the injury. And, you know, they said it was 100% caused by the injury. So, but then learning what I could do to overcome that, or to at least, you know, help compensate and to get better, to build up my energy a little bit. How about you, Angela?
As Kelly said, in the toolbox, one of my important tools for brain breaks is meditation. I give myself 10 minutes of quiet and calm each day. I use an app called the Daily Calm, and it's just 10 minutes. It's a guided meditation. It's a wonderful practice. I've been doing it for a long while.
Also, when you're scheduling, I realized it was important for me to figure out activities that honestly I had no chance at, at getting through without, you know, really paying for it. And so being able to identify what I could get through almost easily versus things that were incredibly hard for me, I could schedule my days around it. How many days would I need for recovery afterwards? And also saying no without guilt. I can't do everything I used to be able to. I have to say no, or even if I want to please people, which I love doing, I can't. I'm not going to be able to give my full self to people when I'm running myself dry. Angela?
And no is a full and complete sentence. Prioritize your health. That's the priority. It's so easy to say yes, and there's maybe lots of invitations. I would try to put everything on my calendar that I used to before the injury, and my calendar would get so full I was missing appointments, I was showing up late, and I began to learn the power of just saying no to prioritize my own health. My bonus mom explained to me when I was recovering at home, my new full-time job is healing. So all of our full-time jobs now is healing. Kelly?
It's true. And, you know, for you, Kelly, I'm sure it was really difficult. You know, you were in college. That's the time where you function, a lot of college students function on very little sleep, you know, going to class, studying, parties, everything. But you have to learn how to prioritize. It took me a long time to do that because, again, I would say yes, 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 and then would crash, and then my family would be the target of that crash. And just giving up some control of things and saying, you know what, I can no longer handle this, so I need help. And for me, asking for help was probably one of the hardest things to admit that I couldn't do it all. But I had to figure out how to do that for my own health, because it's like in the air, you know, when you're on an airplane, they always say, put your oxygen on first before your child, because if you can't, you know, do anything, they're not. And I had to learn that through trial and error. But I, you know, I'm not perfect, but I try to, you know, model that every single day.
There's so much guilt with that, I'm sure, especially with you. You were a mom, you had kids, and yeah, you just can't do it. It's impossible. You're not doing justice to yourself, and you're not doing justice to other people in your life who depend on you. What are some other factors, Kelly, besides sleep that were important for you to reconsider?
Well, there's of course the sleep hygiene, but there's also nutrition. So eating right and, you know, trying to, which is hard too, because it takes a lot more brain power to like plan out a meal, make sure you have the healthy things. It's not like just calling up and ordering pizza, which seems so easy. So making sure you're hydrated, and also doing, you know, work with hormones, especially for females, really, really helped me a lot. But also, like you said before, Kelly, finding the right doctor who can help you. And it's okay if you go to a doctor and it's not a good fit. It's okay to say, no, thank you, and then move on to another. It is very time consuming, takes a lot of patience, but keep looking, because you will find eventually someone who will be able to help you.
My bonus mom measured my hormones, and She helped really improve my sleep. She corrected my thyroid level, and I also take progesterone now. But about sleep hygiene, I went to a support group and a sleep doctor came. It was a really important group. And he told us some of the most important sleep hygiene tips is to sleep in a cave, total darkness, get blackout blinds, and to try to sleep in a space with no distractions. That was hard for me because I charged my iPhone on the nightstand next to me, but now I don't. I remove all distractions and keep them away from my bed. And most importantly, I use this sucker, a sleep mask, and I often use it during the day. I have to take a nap. I force this inner child kicking and screaming to take an hour nap, and I might not sleep, but I put that on, and that gentle pressure on my eyelids just helps me reset somehow.
Agreed. The brain breaks have been so important for me. Even if I was, out at a restaurant or something, I would sit in the car, complete silence, not entertaining, not talking, removed from all stimulation. Sorry for the background noise. And yeah, they were really, really crucial. Any other thoughts before we do our takeaways?
Hydration. I could never keep track of drinking water, but this keeps track for me. So because of this water bottle, I drink 64 ounces of water a day.
Kelly, anything?
No, again, just try different things, and then you will find something that works for you.
Yeah, and we're able to build up over time. All right, I'll start. Take brain breaks throughout the day, such as naps, meditation, or a relaxing activity. Angela?
Find out activities that drain you and plan accordingly. This involves learning to say no without guilt.
Consider lifestyle factors such as sleep hygiene, nutrition, hydration, and hormones.
Okay. All right. So now we're moving on to our next topic, coping with difficulty expressing yourself. And we have both Darcy and Paul. So I guess I'll start with Darcy. What were some of the communication challenges you experienced initially after your injury?
Thanks, Greg. I think after the initial injury, I could talk okay. I had trouble formulating words, but what was really telling for me was when a speech therapist said, hey, here's the letter S, write down all the words you can think of in the next 30 seconds. Well, like S or T or N, those are very common letters that have a lot of words. And I would only be able to come up with like 5. And I'm like, I just realized that I had trouble thinking of words and coming up with what they mean. So as a professional speaker, when I try to communicate what exactly I want to say, I usually have no problem, but there may be just this little interruption where I have to think of the word. It's like if you've ever been in a conversation, you'd be like, that word is just, it's on the tip of my tongue. Or, you're going through the Rolodex or, in your mind trying to search for that word. That's where I first realized that I had aphasia and I just had difficulty coming up with the words. What about you, Paul?
My communication was the cornerstone of my business world. And now that I couldn't talk right, couldn't remember what I just said, I would confuse words. I was giving a talk just like Darcy mentioned, and in the middle of the sentence, I said, I'm a good communist. What I meant to say was I'm a good communicator. And it was a little hiccups along the way that punched my denial in the face and said, no, you've got something to deal with here. And by the way, the stutter, the stammer, that just doesn't go away with a nap. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. And from others, my friends around me who didn't understand the same as me. Like I mentioned before, putting an A in front of a consonant, I learned about that in a movie. I learned a lot of my strategies on my own just by picking and choosing, and it worked for me. I included it. It didn't work for me, such as being teased or being laughed at, because right in the middle of a sentence, I'll, you know, it just did it. It'll happen. Yesterday, I was talking to a friend, and the stutter came out 15 years post. It doesn't come out very often, so it's funny in that moment. I had to give a minute to get over my anger, to realize that this is part of what I deal with, and that this person that's laughing at me doesn't understand what's happening. As I searched for alternatives, and I'll search for understanding, as a lot of brain injury survivors do, I hooked upon this word aphasia, and aphasia to me is more than words. It's actions. So I'd go into the other room and forget while I was in there. Yes, I was 42 at the time. Yes, everybody does that, but not somebody with a brain injury, because we do it like 100 times a day. So mine was very repetitive, and I would repeat things, and very stark difference from where I came from the day and a half before.
I think one thing, Paul, you brought up too, there are other different forms of aphasia, and sometimes active listening to make sure that when we do communicate, we communicate well, because sometimes we just may not pick up what the other person is saying. And it's just listening and making thoughts as to, okay, this is what they're saying, and then so that allows us to communicate back to them, is helpful.
Yeah, somebody mentioned earlier, this is your job. So my job is to make sure you can understand me and not laugh at me. It's about that simple. And there are strategies. Taking a nap does help, but if I'm going to a party at night, I will not talk that afternoon, because I want to give all of my brain a rest, and my jaw and everything in between the exit of what I'm going to say, because I'm only going to have bits and pieces of information come out, and I want to make sure those are good versus disjointed, dysfunctional, because it is, brain injury to me is a matter of dysfunction. So some function is going to be broken. And my communication box was clogged when I had my brain injury in 9/11/2007. I have to admit, oxygen therapy did help with grease the skids, if you will, grease the gears to get the words out. But late in the day, I'm going to have the challenges, and that's okay. There's a thing called sleeping at night. That turns us over again, turns me over again.
Well, Darcy, what are some of the strategies you found helpful?
I think one of the strategies that I use is that I find a synonym for the word. Or like the other day, I was talking about shower cap, and I called it a hairnet. And I knew it was something that went over my head and over my hair, but I just could not think of it. So I found something that was very similar to it until the actual word came into my brain. So I said hairnet, and then I'm like, oh, no, that's not right. But it gave the idea of, okay, this is what it's covering my hair. And then I was able to think of, oh, that's shower cap. So I try to think of an adjective or a synonym that's similar to that. So also I describe things, like if I want to say a shower cap, I could say, oh, that's something that goes over your hair when you get in the shower. And then that triggers, oh, well, that's a shower cap for the person, whoever you're talking to. Or I'm going to go down this street. If you can't think of street or staying in between the lines on the street, then you could say, yeah, it's, if I go outside of this line, I go in off the road. And it's just finding a synonym or finding something very similar so that you can describe it for the other person, so maybe they can understand the meaning of what you're trying to say.
That's a good idea. All right. Do we want to go to the takeaways?
One thing I wanted to add was anger. If I could release the anger about not being able to speak, I could speak better in the next breath. In other words, the more I got angry about the fact that I had a stutter, stammer, loss of words, all this other stuff, if I release the anger attached to it, I could get through the sentence, the concept, the statement better.
And I think that's a great point, Paul, because stuttering or stammering or not thinking of a word, it can get you really frustrated. And sometimes it would frustrate me because I just couldn't get out what I wanted to say, and I couldn't communicate my thoughts. So you tend to get frustrated. So just be aware of that.
Be patient, be patient. Yes, go ahead, please. Darcy?
So coping strategies do exist, and learn more about aphasia, especially with Bruce Willis bringing the topic of aphasia to light. There's a lot more information out there about it. So learn some of the coping strategies that might exist with that, and some of the things that Paul mentioned about, taking a break, just removing yourself from the situation if you can, so you can regroup. But learn more about coping strategies and aphasia.
Know that communication issues may be more likely to occur if you're tired, overwhelmed, or emotional. So if somebody's teasing me, or somebody's laughing at me, or somebody's looking down their nose at me, like you don't have a brain injury, blah blah blah, I'm gonna get more emotional than I used to anyway, and sometimes it revisits. But try and take that with a grain of salt. I know that's a big concept, but when I'm worn down, so at 5 or 6 tonight, it's more likely that I'll have a stutter or a stammer. Be patient.
Consider a speech pathologist to help identify accommodations for your communication deficits. So like when I went to my speech therapist and she had me write down words that begin with S, it's okay if you can only do a few words. And then maybe the next day do a few more, or next day do a few more. If you want to, go find a word search book and start searching for words to help you process some of the words, so that way you can later on think about them when you want to communicate. So those are some things too.
And to tag on what you just said, if you made 4 words, you made 4 words. That's progress.
Yes.
Enjoy it, be thankful for it, and maybe try to make 5 words. And they don't have to be supercalifragilistic. They don't have to be really big, long words. They can be and, at, ask. There's 3 right there.
Mm-hmm.
So enjoy your triumph on your journey, whatever that means. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, we're going to move on to the next topic, identifying and managing brain overload.
So Darcy, Angela, and I are going to talk about overload. So if you're a brain injury survivor watching this, most likely overload is a term that you are very familiar with. It is that feeling of when everything just becomes too much, that feeling of I can't handle this, when it feels like your brain is just going to explode from everything. So we're going to talk about recognize our limitations and recognizing some of the triggers, and how do we help ourselves from maybe not getting to overload quite as much. So Darcy and Angela, what does the word overload mean to you as a brain injury survivor? What comes to mind?
My email inbox is overloaded. Overloaded means being overwhelmed. It's all encompassing, sensory, lights, sound. It's easy for me to get overloaded. How about you, Darcy?
Yeah, I agree. And it's just too much. My brain is trying to process too much information at the same time, or stimuli. I have a full-time job. So for me, I have to be careful not to get overloaded and just totally want to shut down during the day because of too much going on in my mind and too many fleeting thoughts. So sometimes there are a lot of fleeting thoughts going in your head, and it's hard to sort them out and hard to prioritize them. So that's one thing that I have to deal with.
Yeah, for me, that the analogy of having the too many windows open on the computer. Pre-brain injury used to be able to have like a lot of windows open at the same time and manage, multiple priorities. After brain injury, like I think Angela, you were saying that one of the earlier segments, one thing at a time. And if our brains try to do more than that one thing at a time, it just becomes that too much feeling. And I know for me, it can come from too much thinking. It can come from too much talking. It can come from light. It can come from sound. It can come on slow, it can come on fast. But when it's there, it kind of screams, must take care of now. There is like no, like, I'll deal with that later. Nope, it is like a lie down now. Kind of,
And
and it's frustrating.
And if you don't take care of it now, it gets you even more down the rabbit hole.
Oh, yes.
So when I first went out of the hospital on a medical leave, a medical waiver, I went to a bowling alley. When I walked in the bowling alley and there was too much going on and too much overload in my brain that I'm like, I have to get out of here. So
Yes.
just I put myself in a situation where I just couldn't function and I had to leave, and then you get all frustrated and flustered. So that for me was a brain overload situation.
Yeah, it is that desperate feeling. And, part of managing that is learning what our limits are, because, unfortunately, brain injury, it just comes with a new limitation. So how did we learn, what our limitations were? I know for me, basically the hard way. That I would go into situations with absolute confidence. Yes, I can do this. I would be shocked, absolutely shocked when I couldn't do it. And I would spend hours or days on the couch, recovering. But over time, and with help from a lot of people, gradually began to get an idea of what my limits were.
For me, when I went back to work, I wanted to get back to work, and I wanted to get back to doing what I used to be able to do. And I didn't realize that I do have brain overload. I do have to process and work and I couldn't do things like I could before. So I had to then integrate some strategies, but I had to accept that my brain cannot handle exactly what it was I did before. And sometimes I would put myself in a situation where I would jump back too soon thinking, oh, this is great. I feel good today. I have good days and bad days. This is a good day. I know I can last all day. I know my brain's fine with it. But by the end of the day, or even part of the day, I was overloading. And I tell my husband, I have no gas left in the tank. That's one of my clues. I have no gas because I didn't manage my brain overload, and I allowed it to get the best of me. What about you, Angela?
Well, as I said earlier, I used to put more things on my calendar as I used to, Angela 1, and I started missing appointments and things were slipping through the cracks. So now I know, after a lot of trial and error, one important event a day. So for example, today, this is a very important event. We've been working on it for 6 months. I'm going to take a great nap after this, and there's nothing else on my calendar. One important big event a day, and then usually there's a recovery day, so I'm going to take it really easy tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think you bring up an important point, that learning from failure, but also learning from success, learning from what works well, that helps us learn our limits. So
I also get really snippy when time closes in. I get a really bad attitude.
So that you're bringing up signs our brains get overloaded, because I know early on in my journey it felt like I went from 0 to overload in 3 seconds flat. But now I know that my brain generally, unless it's like a sudden loud sound or something, but my brain gives me signs that I'm getting overloaded. And if I can recognize the signs and act on them and rest, I can do less time on the couch if I don't let it get to where it's a desperate situation. So what are some of the signs, the quote tells that our brain gives us when it's getting overloaded? How about for you, Angela?
I don't play poker, but that's the word tell. And my tell is I yawn. And I'm not always aware that I yawn. So I ask people around me, my loved ones, if you happen to see a yawn, let me know, because I've got to get out of here and go restore myself somewhere. And I would just go from one room to the next, half finishing a task. And then, how about you, Darcy?
For me, mine was actual pain in my brain, like a migraine, because my brain was having trouble processing, and it was hitting a wall every time it was trying to do something, and it would cause my brain. I physically felt pain. So like at the end of a work day, I would tell my husband, my brain really hurts. And you think, okay, how can a brain that you don't see, it's not like you bumped it into like bumped something where it would cause it to hurt, but it hurt just because of trying to focus, trying to manage my overload, and I didn't do a very good job of it. So it just caused me physical pain in my brain.
Yeah, and for me, I don't yawn, but I get pressure in the left side of my head, and I will start to feel like, I call it like I'm talking through Jello or I'm talking through cotton. I'm starting to feel it, now, because we've been on camera for a while, and this is a big deal, what we're doing today. That it will start to feel like my words are getting labored. It might not be any different to what somebody is noticing, what somebody hears, but I notice that there's a difference. Like what Angela was saying about kind of wandering from room to room, I do that too. Like I'm thinking I'm being all productive, but I'm not actually getting anything done. So I kind of go from task to task, but I can't seem to get anything done. I've also noticed in the last couple of years that sometimes I get this euphoric feeling. About 10 or 15 minutes before I start to slide, I'll think, today's the day, I'm not gonna need a nap. And then invariably, like 10, 15 minutes later, whoa, I gotta lie down. It's a matter of learning those. Yes. I call my injury Brain Hilda. So I'd say, oh, Brain Hilda, she's in the building. So what are some of our strategies? How do we manage that overload?
I'm comfortable disclosing about my injury. I ask people for accommodations to slow down. I often ask people to write things down in an email or to help me take the notes, to just speak more clearly, to make sure I understand what they're saying. How about you, Darcy?
I think that's a really good point, because not only when you are reading something, the more senses you involve, the more clarification we need. So for me with brain overload, and that I would also go into one room and they're like, okay, why am I in here? What am I doing? But I would need to focus on one thing. I wouldn't let multiple thoughts hijack my brain. So sometimes what worked for me would be I would physically out loud say, I am going into this room to do this, because then I would hear it, I would think of it. So that worked for me, was telling verbally out loud what I was going to do and focus on one thing at a time.
I put my rest times like actually on my schedule, so that like Angela, I would try to do too much in a day, but by putting my rest times on the schedule, it bypasses some of the overload, because it's like, wait a minute, I can't put too much on because I have to have that at least once, oftentimes twice a day rest time. So some of our takeaways.
Sorry, you brought up a very good topic with that, with the rest time, is know when you are good, your best time of the day, whether it be morning, early afternoon. And if you do have to schedule that rest time in between, but so your brain doesn't get overloaded, know what is the best time for you in the day. Sorry, carry on.
That's okay. So some of our takeaways for this section are to get to know your brain injury and what triggers symptoms, and to notice what happens as your brain overloads.
Coming to terms with limitations can be painful, but over time, you can find freedom within your boundaries.
It's important to test limits safely. Some limits you can overcome, and some you'll learn to manage over time with support.
Okay, going to transition to the next final segment, dealing with family and friends who don't understand brain injury. This is a common issue we get a lot from the Brain Injury Association Brain Injury Helpline. So we'll start with Kelly. Can you kind of describe some of the challenges of trying to explain brain injury to others?
Sure. So like most of us, we look like your average person. We don't have any scars. We don't have any physical disabilities. So I think it's very hard for people to understand that what they see is not always what they're going to get. Just like don't judge a book by its cover. How many times I've heard, but you look fine, or she looks fine, there must be nothing wrong, or I'm so glad things worked out for you. It's really hard to get deep down and explain to people exactly what is going on inside of you, because they don't see it. And if they don't see it, they have a hard time believing it. And then sometimes they'll see behaviors, or like when we get very fatigued, as you know, Angela was saying, how she can become, she didn't use the word grumpy, but that's the word I'll use. And then they're like, what's wrong with you? And then trying to explain them, well, that's part of the symptoms of my injury. I think that's one of the hardest things I've experienced in explaining it.
And Darcy?
Yeah, I agree with Kelly 100%, because for those of us who don't have any outward signs of a brain injury, it is very difficult to convey and show that other person that we have had a brain injury. And the only way you can do that is through, you know, behaviors or things that you were able to do before, you're not able to do afterwards. I had to stop and take a nap in the afternoon, and my support circle did not understand why I had to take a nap. I mean, I look fine. I've been doing a lot of things like I used to be able to, but I was fatigued. I got tired, and they were unsure as to why I had to take a nap. And that was one of the hardest things, is because we don't have any outward signs of injury, of brain injury, that people believing what we had to say and how we feel.
Thank you. Paul?
This portion rings true with me, not only because of my own personal experience, but from the 12 years that I've ran a peer-to-peer group here in South Louisiana. It is bar none the quietest answer to say, how can I get my loved one, sibling, cousin, wife to understand this? First of all, I'd like to say that brain injury affects a family. It doesn't affect just one person. And I was told repeatedly that my doctors were pandering, they were making this up, they were stretching this out. I just wanted to get out of work. Again, no, that wasn't what it was. And there for a minute, I believed it. There for a minute, I was like, well, maybe this it. No, it's too persistent. It's too prevalent. And my mom, before she passed, she just would ask me, stop, just stop the stuttering. And I'm like, if I could, I would. I'd go back to work. So I thought, barring the other laundry list of symptoms that I was dealing with. And invariably, it's the smallest town, it's the biggest town. And the person asks me, how can I get my family to understand it? And we'll get to that in a minute. But for me, it was persistence of constantly just reassuring, yeah, it's brain injury. It's a concussion that doesn't go away. And I was blessed to be a part of a support cook-off here in South Louisiana. And one woman that I shared this exact sentiment with said, you saved my family. And I was like, whoa, 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 wait, really? So it was a simple concept, but it was centered around what a brain injury is and how it looks and how it feels and how it sounds like. And so why not share it with the next person? So thanks for having me on this particular topic. Persistence is key. Mine, stay in your own lane and do your own thing, and they'll realize, oh, she or he is really committed to getting his or her brain better.
Kind of leads into the next kind of topic or question is, what were some of the strategies or tools or resources that you found helpful in helping others start to understand a little bit more about brain injury? We'll start with Kelly.
Well, one was educating myself, because I didn't know what a brain injury was. In 2001, no one really talked about them. So one, educating myself, and then also trying to educate others through advocacy or just speaking to them and letting them, know what the different things that can happen with a brain injury. And, it even went as far to, for me, as to showing a family member who didn't believe it, showing them medical reports, because I think that they understood that, oh, if this comes from a doctor, then it must be real. The opposite that Paul had, but it was the only way that I could kind of get it through that this was an actual thing.
Thank you. And Darcy?
I think just showing them if I couldn't do something now, it would, and they would have to give me some patience to do it a little bit longer. I could do something, but it would just take a longer period of time. Or maybe I wouldn't be able to do it at all. Like physically, I can't do things that I used to be able to do. I may look fine, you know, I can walk okay, and the deficiency from my process on my right side is not as noticeable. But when you see me try to run, you see the gait, you see the difference. When I try to do other things like mow the yard or do other chores, you can see a difference. So part of it for me is actually just showing through activity that I can do things. Now, if you do that, make sure it's in a safe environment. But for me, that was one thing, is that to show I cannot do things like I used to, and patience for me was key, that my support group or support circle needed to give me, so I could help be successful and achieve the task.
I think one thing that all three of you touched on is the importance of persistence. This is not one conversation, sharing information that changes the perception, beliefs, and attitudes. It was many conversations over time from not just yourself, but from others as well, right? Other messengers kind of helping support or share the same information or similar information, right, to help others understand.
Sometimes, Greg, with that help showing others was like a movie that talks about brain injury, or a TV show or something that talks about brain injury, that your support circle can hear it from someone else, be like, oh yeah, they have that too, or I have that, or my loved one has this, they can't do it at the same time. So a movie or an article, something that gives you backup and feedback as to, yes, this is something that I have and my loved one has too.
Any other comments to share?
Sorry, the Crash Reel is a great movie that will walk you through a survivor's life, and the family's right there with them. And that's a good one. Concussion is another good one with Will Smith. One thing I wanted to add is give as much grace as you can to the family members that don't understand, and give more time to the ones that do understand. But for me, it was incremental to say, what I just did was part of my brain injury, and then move on. And then what just happened was part of my brain injury, my trip or walking into a wall or whatever. I call it out so that they can get explanation from it. They can get an understanding from it, because we don't have enough information. This is why this whole ultimate webinar exists, and it's trying to get that information out to the person that's sitting there going, okay, now what? And hopefully this will inspire and educate and make a better life, because it just takes one, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one.
And one thing, when a person looks at me and sees I can't do the things I used to, and it's not because I'm lazy. And I think that is a key piece, is that if our family and our friends see that we can't do something, or we just sit on the sidelines, they may think, oh, they just don't want to do it. They're going to use their injury. They're lazy. And that is far from the truth. So don't get caught in that.
As long as you're trying, there's nobody can fuss, or I say that now, but nobody fusses at me when I'm at least trying to get something done. This hour and a half has been a try for everyone on here, including the readers and listeners and everybody. This is all we're trying. So thank you for including this in our topics.
Sure. All right, let's look at the takeaways for this.
I was talking, so I'll just read this one. Role changes are normal and expected, yet still difficult. If your support system is no longer there, as would happen for me, know that you're not alone.
For options such as counseling, conducting your own research, speaking with other families, and joining a support group.
Work together to identify each person's specific changes, needs, and potential accommodations.
Not a cool graphic.
It is. All right, so let's have the rest of the members show yourselves. I'm going to try to go through some of the questions that have come in just for, we've had a few folks ask about being able to share this with others. So this presentation is being recorded. It'll be on the Brain Injury Association of America website. We'll send out the link to everybody that registered. It'll be available. Give us a few days to get it put together and uploaded, but it will be available. You can view it right there and share that link with others. There are a couple of people asked too for other resources to help educate others about brain injury. What were some things? So Paul, you had mentioned this, like some movies. Were there particular, like any like books or other resources that you found particularly helpful in educating others about brain injury? Let's go with Darcy.
For me, Brain Injury Association of America has some great resources on their website. Also on LinkedIn, Brain Injury Association of America lists several articles. Like recently, there was one on recovering from concussion and some things, some signs and symptoms and things, what to do and what not to do on recovering from concussion. So that is one resource.
Carol.
I think if a family member or a friend can go with you to like a support group or a brain injury conference, I know early on sometimes like family members, they didn't quite believe what I said, but when they heard it from somebody else, oh, it somehow it gave it a different weight, especially when they heard like a whole group of other brain injury survivors saying the same thing that I had said, but it was like strength in numbers, you know, kind of thing that that helped. And I know for me, this is not exactly a resource. I guess it's a self-resource. The more okay I became with myself, with my own acceptance journey, the less what other people thought about my brain injury mattered. That, you know, I know now, I can tell when people don't believe me, I don't care anymore. But early on, I cared a lot.
Yeah.
Bothered me a lot, and I wanted to throw resources at them. And everybody, we're on our own journeys. Our families and friends are also on their journeys. And just like
That's
we
right.
can't rush our journeys, we can't rush theirs. We want them to be on the same path that we are. And a lot of times they're not.
That's right.
Excellent. All right, we had another question come in that I think several people kind of related. Hold on, I know everybody has something to say.
Oh,
So,
Greg, before you move
yes.
on, there's a day in March on Capitol Hill in our U.S. Capitol where we have Brain Injury Awareness Day. So if you're skeptical at all or just curious to find out more, come join us.
Come on down.
Yeah, it should be in person this coming year. You're right.
It opened our eye. It opened my eyes to realize, oh, this is a thing. This is a thing.
Yes. All right. So a couple people asked this kind of similar for the issue on communication. How do you get other people to stop interrupting me so I can finish my full thought? Because when this happens, I forget what I was going to say. So how do you deal with folks who think they're trying to be helpful, are interrupting you to finish your thought, but it really just derails you?
Without telling them that they're annoying? Okay.
I would just say if someone interrupts your thought, I would probably hold up my finger and say, hey, hold on a second, and I need to finish my thought, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say. So I would probably like, if they're interrupting me, kind of just, you know, hold out. Like, this means for me,
I do the same thing.
I'm not done with what I'm saying, but I want to hear what you have to say, because what they have to say may be important. Otherwise, you know, I'll forget what I want to tell you.
Okay. Angela, you say you do the same thing?
I do. I do the finger. And Darcy, you've just added to me. Thank you. I'm not that finger. But Darcy, you just helped me, and I'm going to do this now. That when I pull out the finger, I'm going to say, I do want to hear what you have to say, but I've got to finish my thought before I forget it. So thank you for that, Darcy. I appreciate that.
Mine is a hand and hold on. I just say, hold on, I have to go in turn. And the person's like, oh, he's not finished. Hold on.
I'm looking to some other questions.
But great question, by the way.
It's fantastic.
And all of these questions will be answered following. Don't worry, if your question's not answered, we'll get to it separately afterwards.
Yes, let's say we have a list of who asked what questions. So if we didn't get to it, we'll certainly be reaching out to folks afterwards. Certainly have a few folks asking about how to find professionals, how to find qualified professionals. I don't know if anyone has any particular strategies or resources for that. Angela?
Yeah, I was seeking a neuropsychologist, and it's really important that this person, neuropsychologist, therapist, understand brain injury. I had an awesome person that I was working with in New York City, and when I made my transition to Asheville, as I believe it was Kelly said earlier, you can choose and hire and fire your doctors. You're not stuck with a person, a professional. So you are you're the captain of your own recovery team. And so I interviewed for this highly important position. I interviewed 3 or 4 professionals for the job of my psychologist, my neuropsychologist. And I found the neuropsychologist by asking my support group facilitator and getting valuable resources and information from that community, pointed me in the right direction. Paul?
Part of our group, Amaze Brain Health Group, because we already had the injury, let's focus on health. A good part of our speaker tour that we have once a month is about talking about this exactly, who had what experience with whom, what different modalities are being offered by different people. But that curiosity, that adventure, that instigation of let's go find out, it will forward your path. Sometimes it'll fall right into your lap if you ask the right question at the right time. So keep asking.
Yeah, and building on what Paul just said, one thing that worked for me was when I would see one provider to say, who else should I be seeing for this? Because I mean, I've never had a brain injury before. I don't even know what I don't know.
Right.
What kinds of, I mean, I'd never heard of like occupational therapy before. I mean, I'm a physiatrist, all these professions I had no idea even existed. But I got referrals from people and gradually built a team that I wanted somebody to kind of give me the everything all at once. It just unfortunately doesn't work that way. You can build a team, it just takes time, one little bit at a time.
I'm still building my team.
Oh, yeah.
You got something to add, Kelly P?
Also call Greg, call BIAA, call your state Brain Injury Association or Alliance. I always thought that with just a concussion, they wouldn't be able to help me or take me seriously enough, but they can really help, and they can point you to different doctors or practitioners that have a good reputation in the community.
To back up a second, if you're online, try brainline.org. They are on the spot to give understanding to varying symptoms and varying situations, family, friends, symptoms, military, children for that matter. Brainline.org is another, MSKTC is another go-to, so you can find out what's going on within the community. So you can kind of, with me, it's a check and balance. I can think what I'm thinking. I got, my friends, and they say, drinking Kool-Aid's good. Let me go over there and see what they say about drinking Kool-Aid. Just using that as a loose example.
Yep. All right. Well, we thank you for coming and sharing your expertise. We thank the folks that came and listened and asked questions. We do have a few questions we'll follow up with outside of the webinar. We will be sending out the link to be able to find the webinar on the Brain Injury Association website. And it sounds like some other things you should probably add with that information are some other suggested resources, right? Some other websites, say MSKTC, list of virtual support groups, where to find your BIA in your state. We'll add those and send those out.
Find that support group. Get into that
Yes.
support group.
Yes. If folks ever have questions, you're obviously more than welcome to contact me at the Brain Injury Association of America, and we'll work to connect you with the appropriate resources.
That
Thank
info is
you
on the next
all.
slide.
What?
That info is the how to contact on the next slide.
Wait, Carol's so good at this.
I always
There you go.
All right, here we go. That's it. Call that number. You can reach me.
You
Thank
are
you,
not alone.
everybody, for participating today.
You are not alone.
All right, take care. Have a safe day, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.